Hello, everybody. It's Chelsea. I'm back for another podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at another ethical case study regarding teacher misconduct. And I'm going to be joined by some special guests today, Jess, Jessi, and Kodi. And I'm excited to have them on board. As I remind you every week, teaching is a professional practice in which many legal, moral, and ethical frameworks guide its practice. And as Forces suggests, professional practice is not always ethical practice. The stuff that guides teaching is the VIT Code of Conduct. That's a moral framework. The VIT Code of Ethics is the ethical framework. The VIT is then given the responsibility to create these frameworks by the ETRA, which is then the legal framework. And obviously, this framework's in place so that they can regulate the profession and make sure teachers know what's expected of them and what the consequences might be if they step out of line. So the case study is today's of Shane Osborne, and he's seen to be stepping out of line in all of these frameworks. And his case was brought to the tribunal in 2017, and four of his allegations were substantiated, and he was found guilty on them. And they were as follows: teacher failing to maintain a professional relationship, teacher failed to maintain objectivity in his relationship, teacher failing to maintain a professional relationship with the parent, and teacher conducting himself in an improper manner that would have an impact on the standing of the profession as a whole. So we want to know, where did Shane Osborne cross the line? I think we should start with looking at it from an ethical point of view. So we have the lovely Jessi first up. She's looked into this case for me, and she's going to share her knowledge on how the ethical frameworks align with Shane's serious misconduct. Thanks, Jessi.
The ethical framework and Shane's scenario. According to the Victorian Institute of Teaching, the core values that underpin and facilitate the profession of teaching and the facilitation of learning of the students include respect, responsibility, and integrity. Integrity is demonstrated through maintaining a professional relationship with all learners, the community, fellow colleagues, and parents and carers to the student. Teachers are to act and behave in a way that shows respect and progresses this profession in a positive state and manner. Integrity within a teacher also is to act the most appropriate to the interest and influence of the learners and their experience within the school environment. In regards to respect, teachers are to provide as well as demonstrate respect through their actions of compassion and care at a professional level that does not provide any grey area or caution with the students. Fair treatment is expected to reflect the level of respect that is shown to each student, that each student is treated as an equal to one another. The acknowledgement that students, parents and carers are also in partnership with the educators themselves regarding their child's education and their growth and development within their learning is a huge aspect of respect a teacher must have, as well as holding colleagues with highest regards within their teaching relationships, efforts and work ethic within the school environment to ensure the school is portraying the highest level of respect to everyone within this learning environment. In terms of responsibility, it's seen through the quality of teaching provided to the students, as the educator has the role of producing well-facilitated lessons and learning for the students. Teachers need to not only maintain a professional practice of the educational environment and behaviours depicted within this, but also develop this further to ensure professionalism is maintained and students learn within a safe environment. Cooperative work as a team with fellow colleagues, allowing learning to be promoted and the best interest of each individual student's learning to be achieved is a huge factor of responsibility within the learning environment, as each student deserves the opportunity to learn to the best of their ability. As provided above, it is clear within the case study of Shane and the following repercussions that occurred due to his actions and behaviours. He failed to meet and demonstrate, as well as combine the above into his teaching practice, as well as the educational environment regarding the safety and well-being of the school students. It is evident that we know from Shane's case he failed to facilitate aspects within each core value this profession demonstrates. He did not maintain a professional relationship with the students due to crossing the line to what may deem to be as grooming. Through this presumed inappropriate conversations and actions towards a particular student or students, Shane also failed to act appropriately toward the interests of the students, where he rather acted upon his own interests himself towards his targets. Shane's level of compassion and care towards students was that of unsafe and crossed a clear line that was impractical and a danger to the students he encountered. His behaviour to the student or students he deemed to be of desire was not fair, rather the extra attention deemed to be harmful. Shane demonstrated no professional practice within his teaching or encounters with the students. He also did not develop these practices in a healthy, safe and productive way. He himself was a harm to the school environment and the students he preyed upon throughout the school day, outside of the school, any encounter he had with the students. It was in Shane's best interest to how each student was treated, and learning was provided, a way to gain himself pleasure rather than the best interest of the student receiving a safe and fulfilling education.
That's a really good insight from my friend Jessi. I love how she explored how Shane was most likely reasoning his actions, which is ethics. Shane's definitely showed favoritism, which was both unfair to the student at focus and the student not receiving this attention, as he's offered to write school captain speeches, give gifts, free driving lessons, and even often to mentor one-on-one outside of school on many occasions. It just makes this relationship not only unfair, but unsafe. I also have another good friend who also looked into Shane's case, and she's focused on how Shane crossed the line using moral frameworks. And I think after watching Jess, you will see the similarities between the Code of Ethics and Code of Morals in this scenario.
Moral guideline is an idea or opinion that's driven by a desire to be good. The Department of Education and Training Victoria, or DET, has defined a set of values and morals which are able to be used and aligned with all current education systems and schooling environments. Responsiveness, integrity, impartiality, accountability, respect, leadership, and human rights are the 7 behaviours that the government and community should see throughout all Victorian schools from employees. All 7 of these behaviours should be demonstrated throughout each individual educator's teaching practice. Through following these moral guidelines, trust, communication, and safety within the school community can be ensured. When members of the school community, especially those who are employed by the school, act in accordance with the moral values of their school, the Department of Education and Training Victoria, and the Victorian Institute of Teaching, or VIT, the capability to operate effectively as a safe, positive educational school and achieve all set objectives is achieved. Educators are expected to act responsively in a swift and positive manner by having the ability to adjust to a situation which may have the capability to turn into an educational or learning obstacle. Educators are also able to show that they are able to provide a positive influence within schooling communities and, no matter the circumstance, always show positivity. Educators also need to ensure that there is equal and fair treatment of all students and members of the schooling community. This will therefore ensure that impartiality is addressed. A good leader will address all of these 7 moral values and ensure that the environment they are working in is safe and possesses a positive attitude or outlook. As Jessi has previously stated, integrity, respect, and responsibility all fall under the ethical framework also, as they are part of the widely accepted code of conduct. Shane Osmond was found quite clearly to not have followed both of these ethical and moral frameworks set by his state, community, and school. As per the school that he worked at, bullying and harassment policy, harassment is language or actions that are demeaning, offensive, or intimidating to a person. It can take many forms, including sexual harassment and disability harassment, and harassment of any kind will not be tolerated at that school. These actions from Shane have proved that he has not taken the appropriate actions and also not followed the school community's missions and values of respect, excellence, and responsibility, which were founded as a direct result of collaborative work by all students, staff, and parents.
Awesome stuff, Jess. It's pretty clear after listening to Jess how similar hers was to Jessi. The ethical and the moral framework are quite similar. And I think the overarching thing that we're talking about here is we're not talking about Shane's ability to teach content. It's more about his ability to objectify himself in a student-teacher relationship. So we're going to touch on that further into the legal framework, and both the girls touched on the grooming and the sexual harassment. So what I found on this was under the Crimes Act, under Section 49M, grooming is an offence where an adult over the age of 18 years old designs conduct to facilitate later sexual activity. In my opinion, Shane has done just this. He's participated in many different forms of grooming, and such as he messaged the student over 1,650 times. he encouraged them to meet up one-on-one. His messaging got so bizarre that he would tell him that he was disappointed he hasn't messaged while he was on holidays. It's a two-way relationship or friendship. And it was very emotionally manipulative. And you could say that the teacher was developing romantic feelings towards the student. And the teacher went as far to say, "I would never make a move on you unless you wanted me to." To me, that insinuates sexual conduct. So that's definitely, in my books, grooming. And as a teacher, he has a duty of care to maintain a strictly professional relationship with the student. And it's clear from this evidence that he can't. Some would take this case further, as Melaine, I would tend to agree with. Sexual harassment is potentially what he's also guilty of, which is unwelcome sexual conduct, including suggestive comments, jokes, and displaying pictures of sexual nature. And once again, personally, I believe that he crossed this line as well. He would send videos of masturbation to the student and say, "This reminds you of me." He nicknamed their penises and joked around about different sexual jokes. And he used to touch the student on the shoulders and call him muscles. And in all of this, the student felt it was very not mutual and that there was no reciprocation back. It was obviously just a one-sided friendship or relationship there. But at the end of this case, Shane wasn't found guilty of sexual harassment. Often with teaching misconducts, like with sexual harassment, it's usually a matter of a human rights law rather than criminal, but it does depend on the nature of the conduct of the situation. And if not conciliated, it can be taken to court and found as a criminal offence. So before we discuss the compliance and sanctions applied to Shane for this, it's also important that I clarify that although it may imply in a hearing that a teacher has committed a crime such as sexual harassment, which this hearing did not imply it, but from my evidence, I gathered that. But the VIT do not have any power to enforce Crimes Act, but they do obviously have specific responsibilities to regulate teacher registration. So if a teacher has been convicted of a sexual offence under section 2.6.29, their registration automatically cancels if they're convicted of a sexual offence and they're disqualified from teaching in school. So Shane's obviously committed a serious misconduct here, but maybe due to the lack of substantial evidence, these allegations haven't gone further. So that takes me into this sanctions and compliance of Shane's case, which I would love to welcome Kodi to join me in a discussion about this. Hey, Kodi, how are you going?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining me for today's podcast. I've just been discussing how I think Shane is guilty of grooming and potentially sexual harassment in this case study. I know you've been looking into this and you've got some info on the various compliance measures and sanctions. Care to share with everyone?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's good to contribute in this case. It's a really interesting one and pretty disgraceful, some of the things that came out of it.
Yeah.
Shane Osmond, as part of the investigation with him being a teacher into the professional codes of conduct, he's not meeting some of the following principles in section 1.4. In the profession, teachers do not behave as a friend or parent or guardian and keep personal agendas separate. Well, we know he's obviously overstepped the lines from the testimony and affidavits that have been shared during the case. And I would also like to add that the lines probably aren't clear to the student and certainly to the teacher of what's acceptable, and especially a younger student not knowing where the boundaries are and understanding the role of a teacher is really important. And he's failed to uphold those. Principle 1.5, teachers are always in a professional relationship with their learners, and that's whether they're at school or teaching or not. And that's an important one to recognise that this was clearly overstepped on numerous times, and that would be through online chat that he was doing. Certainly I would draw the line maybe the driving lessons and things like that, as well as the various home visits. Certainly him coming to his own home is totally not acceptable, and as well as even the bit of a red flag when he hopped on the plane, that one there is a bit alarming. 1.6 is another principle as well, professional relationship with the parent or carer. I don't think that was showed to be very healthy at all, with the way he sort of just rocked up at the house and the parent was probably awkward about it, the student's mother, and that certainly is overstepping that boundary of Oh, my screen just dropped out. No, it's okay. Certainly overstepping that boundary. Section 2 in the principles is exploitation of his personal position for benefit. So being a teacher, I feel that it's clearly been stated in the report that he's overstepped the boundaries and exploited his position as an educator to gain access to this student, to see this student outside of school, to message this student, all for, whether that's emotional or sexual needs of himself. Section 3.2, teachers are aware and comply with legal requirements that pertain to the profession. That's an obvious one. He needs to be aware of what he's legally allowed to do and how to conduct himself. And I think that is definitely blatantly overstepped, and that we can see in the report. This brings me on to the next topic of duty of care and responsibilities, which Chelsea, you touched on, and so did Jess and Jessie a little bit. But basically just furthering on that the duty of care needs to be abided to by the teacher, also the principal and other staff members. So that encompasses reporting and that as well. The Child Safety Code of Conduct and Child Wellbeing and Safety Act in 2005 list and cover obligation to report and what constitutes as reasonable grounds for reporting. The Child Safe Standard 5 in particular discusses a responsibility to speak up and report suspected child abuse. In the case of this, and the school it had been brought to the attention of the college principal and leadership on at least 2 occasions we can see in the report, where the principals had a meeting with the staff member in question and adequate steps were not taken. A belief on reasonable grounds must be reported to as listed under the mandatory reporting section of the Victorian government's legal requirements for certain professions, of which education and teaching is one of them. The principal was aware of interactions and conduct unbecoming of the teacher during at least one of their meetings and should have discussed this and followed this up further. We can then move on to grooming and sexual assault, which you touched on as well. That could have been followed through, and the VIT may then choose to investigate, or the principal would have the option to liaise with superiors to sort of voice those concerns. And the individuals that are found not to report can be found guilty of failure to disclose offence. Again, with compliance, there's also severe questions surrounding the compliance with the school addressing these child safe standards, and they're not adequate. Procedures around teachers working one-on-one with students, whether that's in or out of school or in the homework club, things like that, I found to be alarming, and not following correct or professional procedure, especially after the teacher had received the concern from the principal about how to conduct themselves and Facebook and things like that. That was in the report. The school has a code of conduct, obviously, and Jessie and Jess spoke about that, with expectations of the staff and students and morals and ethics that they touched on. But that's all about compliance as well, and neglecting these, allowing the teacher to take homework club, things like that, and non-monitoring or following up on situations is alarming. So as a result of the investigation, the teacher received a 5-year suspension and cancellation of registration as a result of the VIT panel investigation in conjunction with the Victorian Education Reform Act 2006. So I found that to be pretty self-explanatory. The offences he was accused of were pretty alarming and disgraceful, so that's a no-brainer. It's not as if there's a grey area there. The opinion is that further investigations and charges should have been followed through with in relation to not only the teacher but the leadership and the principal at the college, as the child safety regulations are clear on three laws in particular: failure to protect, failure to disclose, and grooming. As a result, the school could be found liable for the first 2, failure to protect and failure to disclose, by obviously, not to take the necessary steps with the issue, whilst the teacher could be potentially charged for grooming, which you touched on. And in this case, there's potentially, predatory conduct to facilitate further sexual needs. Some further notes on the discipline or potential initial steps that could have been taken and were neglected to in this process is that leadership in the college and the principal in particular, as part of his due process, neglected to uphold or fulfil their duties, by even ceasing activity or ceasing the contact between the teacher and the student, neglecting to cease his role in the homework club, and the failure to put the teacher on maybe like employment improvement contract, which they can have in place, which may involve, they could have training or conversations on appropriate professional conduct, and professional improvement action plan could be drawn up. This could have been done earlier on when the things like the Facebook and all those earlier alarm bells were ringing this action plan could have put in place to protect everyone at that stage as well. And obviously then they could have spoke to the college board or further leaders about it in the confidential setting. But other than that, that's the findings on discipline and sanctions.
Yeah, I like what you brought up about how there was a lot of other people who should be held responsible for the teacher's actions, like the principal, even the mother who didn't bring it to anyone's attention when she even heard about all of this. It seemed like it went on for far too long than it really should have for some.
And I mean, the parent one is a bit of a grey area because, like we just touched on with the obligation to report, with the new laws, you are obligated to report if you suspect sexual assault or offences committed against a minor. The parent is sort of that little bit of a grey area. But even as a principal, the principal could have touched base with that parent maybe in an informal way and, maybe just said, oh, how's the student going? Oh, yeah, I see they get along with this teacher. And they say, oh, right, because the teacher, obviously, remember in the report, was claiming to be personal friends with the family. So I would have sounded that out first and maybe, sorry, the light's just gone. Monitoring, would have really monitored that contact and principals have a responsibility to pull teachers out of classes or out of that situation if you've got to just cover all bases. And the mentor program, while I know they had really good intentions probably for initially, I don't think the child safety and supervision procedures were addressed properly. The process of teachers nominating their own students is a bit questionable. So maybe that but the VRT sanctions are fairly self-explanatory in this case, I think. And in terms of discipline, there's not much else that could have been with that being severely
100%
the case. Yeah. So my other little red flag would be that in the report is registered from 2002 to 2017. This wasn't found, so maybe there did need to be a further investigation as a result.
Yeah, we don't know how long he's been doing it for. It's sounds like
alarming. Yeah,
exactly. So it's an unfortunate case, and some people might think the 5-year sanction was too long. I probably would say it's not long enough. But
no,
that's when ethical opinions come into play as well here. So thanks for joining me, Kodi, in discussing this analysis. And I hope everyone enjoyed this podcast, and you'll be back next week for another ethical case review. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.